I don't think I ever really believed everything.
And I realized that quite a few of the things didn't hold water.
The actual religions were man-made from wherever.
God? Who's God? What's God?
I think skepticism really is the first step.
Scientific zest and zeal for the real world.
That was it. I was an atheist from then on.
And if you're a believer with a question that you know you can't answer where you are, we'll be happy to answer.
Hi, I'm Red.
Hi, I'm Susan, and welcome to this episode of My Road to Atheism. Today we have Dennis Horowitz, who is our fearless, what do you say at the...
David Letterman.
David Letterman of the Hopelessly Damned.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's a little unusual. I'm usually one that asks the question,
Yes.
so
That's right.
you know I'm going to be grilled today.
Yes. So
David,
let's start at the beginning.
Yes.
Okay. Well,
When you were young or a child, and how did things progress from?
Well, I was brought up raised Jewish. Brought up in a family that attended an Orthodox synagogue, but basically we observed the major Jewish holidays, and one or two of the minor ones. But
Sort of a cafeteria Jew, like the Catholics, the cafeteria Catholics. On the major days that they go and other days.
Yeah, I guess it's just something that, it's not that they weren't believers, but but my parents, of course, had passed away. But by the time they died, they were actually what you would call observant Jews, and they got into it. They really got into it.
So you grew up in a kosher household? I mean, with the two sets of...
No, I wouldn't say if you were like an Orthodox rabbi, you wouldn't have considered us a kosher home. We didn't eat pork and that kind of stuff.
Can I answer the question, did you have faith? I always ask that question.
If we did, it was because I brought it in or something. We didn't really keep kosher until much after I grew up and actually moved out.
But did you eat non-kosher food outside the house?
Oh, sure.
Okay, so it's only internal.
So bacon and ham were.
And you didn't have the two separate sets for milk and meat and
Oddly enough, we did.
you did.
It was very weird. Now that I never looked at it from that perspective, but now that I'm
What
having a moment.
denomination was that? Was that considered conservative?
We consider ourselves Orthodox because we had attended an Orthodox synagogue.
I see. Okay.
So, and a lot of people who attended the Orthodox synagogue were also as non-observant as we were, So.
Did your father dress with the
No.
whole thing?
It was nothing like that. Even after he became more observant, that's the Hasidim are like a specific sect,
Right.
and we were the
Grand Rebbe.
we were the hoi polloi, I think. We're just middle class Jews.
Okay. What would the time that you were young and was there any influence as far as science, mathematics, social, or anything that might have started you on that road to atheism? And at what age would that
I'll
be?
tell you, and I've actually, it's interesting because I've, having talked to lots of atheists over the years, I find that right around the bar mitzvah age through the teens, that's the age that most atheists, I find, start that transition. With me, I have to be honest, initially it was just generally apathy. I was just too distracted by other things. And then as I started approaching the age of bar mitzvah, and I was bar mitzvah, I just began to question certain things. And the funny thing is, sitting here right now, I can't really
Pinpoint.
I can't really pinpoint the things that I was questioning, except something like, well, I opened the prayer book and it would be it would say how you were supposed to be God-fearing and God-loving at the same time. And, why would we have to fear God if there's this loving...
Yes.
It was
internal,
a contradiction.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing that stands out, and I'm sure there were other things. And so I was on the road to atheism, but I really, it wasn't until much later in life that I became actually a philosophical atheist, because I started investing, reading, and investing time
And questioning.
in questioning, and I just got.
What age would that be?
Post college?
Oh yeah, I mean, I was an. I used to tell people, especially in my 20s, that I was an atheist until I had my first cup of coffee in the morning, and after that, I was an agnostic. but not now. I'm an agnostic atheist, which a lot of people don't understand. Is not they're not incompatible. Because one, agnosticism is a philosophical position regarding knowledge, and atheism is a philosophical position regarding belief. But I was initially. I just it didn't. Religion didn't interest me. Certainly by the time I was in my early 20s, it's just something that I didn't. If my family participated, I would, and I was around, I would show up. But it was nothing that I actually believed in. That it's really as much, if not more, of a cultural thing and a sense of affiliation.
It is. Jewish culture is a very, very good and very sound culture, and it's a very effective form of bringing up your children and family affairs and the neighborhood and things of that nature.
And
religion, though, a lot of Jews, as far as I know, I've heard, is say they don't buy into so much of that anymore.
Right. You have a lot of. I think Jews who are atheists or agnostic, you have I think much more of a percentage of Jews who have become atheists or agnostics than I think other people. I will say this, knowing a lot of, because I work part-time at American Atheists, and ironically, I would say 90% of the people who I have anything to do with at all now, because of my affiliation with the organization, are atheists.
Right.
And I probably should mention also that
a good percentage of them are Jews.
I would say at least 25%.
Same in New York City.
Yeah, that's generally true. But it's interesting about Jewish atheists, most Jewish atheists, as opposed to atheists who have come from a Christian or Muslim background. Jewish atheists tend not to be angry at Judaism. It's just okay, and it's more of like an emotional reaction to the group. That, like you said, it's a cultural emotional reaction. Whereas, and I'm sure you can both back me up on this. I know a lot of ex-Christians who are really mad. Not that invalidates their atheism, but you get to that point where you feel you've been lied to. In some cases.
You said that later in life your parents became more believing. So
Yes.
was there any problems with your atheism?
None whatsoever. My sister is, my parents are deceased now, but my sister is an observant Jew. She lives in New Jersey. Every now and then we have discussions, but she's never, and this is an interesting phenomenon I've noticed. She has asked me, why don't you believe in God? But, and maybe you've both gone through this, because I don't think you have to be an activist for long to get this kind of question. After a while.
What was your response to that?
Well, it was very long and involved, but I forgot. I have my talking points just like you have yours, and I'm sure it was one of those. But you don't have to be, I think, an activist very long to know when someone is asking you a question because they really want to know the answer, as opposed to someone who's asking a question because they're being smarmy and they think they're setting you up. And my sister is that kind of person. We have never argued over religion. So when she asks me, I tell her, and I don't comment on what her beliefs are. And I will say this too: a lot of observant Jews and Orthodox Jews, as well as Reform, are very big on the Establishment Clause. They're very pro separation of church and state, because I think history has demonstrated that when you have a theocracy, the Jews
Yes.
the Jews lose.
Yes.
I mean, basically,
That's right.
that's what it is. So,
That's why you have ACLU.
I mean, I've known of people who would argue against me vehemently about the existence of God, but will still come down on the side of separation of church and state,
Yes.
Did you have
which I think is the most important thing that we can do.
Did you have any ostracism from your neighborhood, the community, or family members, relatives, cousins?
I have no sexy stories to tell you about. No, it's funny because this may come as as a surprise, but I was somewhat precocious as a child, and I was kind of off the wall. Okay. So, give you an example. When I go back to high school reunions, nobody is the least bit surprised that I'm an atheist activist. I've just been lucky that I have never faced that kind of because I hear
negative.
Yeah, I mean, we all know people, and many people, maybe you have, who have experienced some real horror stories, and I feel almost guilty because I kind of just breeze through this whole
I
thing.
think it comes from living in New York City.
Well, even before New York City, it's just the thing is that I didn't really become an activist till I was in New York City.
Right.
And
Where were you raised?
I was born in Pennsylvania, but I grew up in Massachusetts.
What part of Pennsylvania?
Oils-
There's a difference, In the Philadelphia area, it's a sort of democratic. However, out west and
well, I actually was born in northwestern Pennsylvania, Oil City, which
that's
is
Oil
about
City, right.
which is about August.
Pittsburgh and
Near Erie.
Erie, okay, Erie County. Well, that whole area out there is like being down south almost in certain areas.
Well, I didn't notice
the
that.
Bible Belt, yeah.
I didn't really become aware that Pennsylvania, in some ways, is like a southern state.
That's right.
Until I think it was like 1969. I was driving along the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and I pulled into a Howard Johnson's. They still had Howard Johnson's then, and I had hair that was just down over my ears, and I walked in there and like. Heads are turning, one of those damn hippies, So I get what you're saying about Pennsylvania. To our friends in Pennsylvania, I just apologize.
Did you, when you do have a discussion with people that might be of a different persuasion as far as worship and religion, et cetera, do your approach to them, is it on a scientific level or is it on a cognitive, logical? Vocal weapon to deal with.
It varies from person to person. If I'm going to, I have, I'm sure we all have friends who are consider themselves born again Christians. Mm-hmm. So if I'm going to have a discussion with this kind of person, again, unless I'm challenged about it, mm-hmm. I might ask them about certain aspects of Christianity or Scripture, or something I might be curious about. Because I feel if they're not telling me, if they're not proselytizing me, then information they give me is probably more reliable. Because why would they lie? It doesn't matter. It's a matter of whether I agree with what the Scripture says, but I might not necessarily disagree that they're accurately telling me what it is Scripture says.
The reason why I'm saying that is for the people out there to understand that when they come out of the closet on that road to atheism, they're going to meet people. If they have a discussion, they have to know what to say and how to be able to say it. And some who use those approaches as far as mathematical, scientific, doing what's called critical thinking or deductive reasoning. And others may use it a different way, a different approach, a social way. So that's why I wanted to know. It's very important for them to understand. It is very important.
And I think using, I don't see why you should, I don't think that using philosophy and science are necessarily mutually exclusive. I think it's a combination of both. And I find in many cases, I've done the tabling at, New York City Atheists. I'm sure Ken is loving the fact that I'm mentioning the tabling.
Again.
Yeah, the tabling. And don't forget the newsletter. But there are people that we've had wonderful discussions with, at the tabling events. But we get people who kind of on the cusp there of deciding. And so I think those kinds of arguments are most helpful in those cases. And you can kind of do it without being a proselytizer, because they come to us. Mm-hmm. So
you do have a church or some group that you belong to. Do you like to tell us a little about that?
Well, I'm,
you're a preacher or... in a different sense, in a different way.
No. The only thing is that I'm actually an ordained minister in the Universal Life Church, which I got And in that capacity, I'm licensed to perform weddings in New York City. And I might as well tell you now that it was kind of a serendipitous thing. Ken and I were setting up to do an interview for New York City Atheists live on tape. So I put in a plug for the show, which I'm host. This was several years now. And we were waiting we had set up, and I had just come back from the city clerk's office, having been, officially registered as an ordained minister in the Universal Life Church. And we're waiting around. Ken gets a call, and it turns out this guy wanted a secular atheist wedding. So I was right there in the room, and it was
Fantastic, huh?
And
Same day,
and I literally had my certification for less than 3 hours when it came in.
That's
So, and I've also had been my pleasure to marry a couple who met at New York City Atheists. So, so that's what I do. But as far as any kind of, I don't really have a church or a cult that certainly not a cult, but. Not that kind of thing. I think you're thinking about Michael Dorian's.
No, just the difference between yours and the average actual theistic type of.
I mean,
the difference being.
The difference being is that I think an atheist group. You can ask Ken. I mean, it's as Madeline Murray O'Hare so effectively said, organizing atheists is like herding cats, because we
individual minds. Huh?
And it's interesting because I think as of late there's these internecine squabbles that are kind of becoming more public, and in some ways it's growing pains. It means that we're we're being
recognized.
There's a movement now called normalized atheism, and I think we're having the same problems that all other organizations have.
Ken, do you want to say something about that?
I just had a couple of sides. Describe the process to become this universalist church.
Universal life. Well, you just go online and you can get ordained.
And it costs you about what?
Actually, you can be ordained for free. And I'm also ordained in the spiritual humanist.
You have dual purpose.
I have dual, but I'm not licensed to officiate at weddings under the spiritual humanist.
There is a battle. This is a side issue. There was a battle that they would only accept either clerks or judges to do weddings. Plus, a religious person had to be part of an organized, accepted church. And over time, we fought that. And this is how this universal church came.
Well, in fact, I wouldn't have become an ordained minister of any kind if at that time you could register as a secular officiant, as they call it, which now you can.
Yeah, New York City at that time was one of the few places in this area.
And I think in New Jersey too.
We fought with that, and we said, why not?
At one time, I'm also a licensed notary public, and. There was a time when notaries public could perform weddings, but they stopped that in New York State around about 40 years ago, I guess. 40, yeah.
More than that.
Maybe more than that,
Definitely.
Lobbying group.
But isn't it in some states that you have to be religious to be a notary public or something?
No. That's a purely secular position. It's just that there probably, I think there are states where you can perform official weddings.
No, I'm talking about this. Some state.
No, right. There are 6 states right now that have on their state laws that you must swear in the Bible and to God.
Right.
But that has been overruled by a Supreme Court decision 40 years ago.
But they haven't taken it off the books, and the reason for that is that...
But I just want to give you a side. This is an interesting side issue. The reason they do that, and it's not only this issue, is that when it's overruled by a court, if it's ever overruled against
rescinded.
it's already there, so they don't have to go through and reenact the law and vote for the law against it.
That's what I was going to
But I
say.
think one of the most interesting ones of all, even in the United States legal system, the thing that said that a black person, when they had the Missouri, the compromise, whatever it was, that blacks are 2/5 of a person, that's still in our law. That has never been taken out.
Is that in the United States,
in
the federal law?
South Carolina, I believe it.
Yeah,
and,
well, 6 states, South Carolina.
There's one of them that's stronger than
In South Carolina,
Mississippi.
we had this guy named Herb Silverman, and he ran for an office.
Right.
And then he said, I want to address the law. And they claimed he had no standing. They said you had to wait till you got elected before you could check the law. Anyway, so how he got around it, in South Carolina, to be a notary public, you have to also swear.
That's
so
right.
he came up, and he refused to swear and said, oh, you're right, you don't have to, and they let him in. So
They let him right in, right then and there. Right. That's
Right. By the way, there are also still blasphemy laws in some states.
Oh, yes.
I think Mississippi is one of them. Yeah.
Probably one of them. Yeah. So your experience has been pretty good on.
I have to tell you, it's just in some ways I'm as an atheist, I'm a very boring guest. I'm sorry. I have no horror stories to tell you.
You haven't run through any confrontation as far as work is concerned.
No, I have.
Socially, maybe.
I've had very lively and interesting discussions, but I've never had my physical well-being threatened or family threatened or anything like that. But I know people who have. I know people who have. And so,
how do you like what you're doing now?
Well, like I said, I work part-time for American Atheists, and I have been, up until recently, the co-host of Atheist Viewpoint, which is which they had was their cable show. In fact, that's how I got on New York City Atheists. Was Ken saw me do that show. Yeah, and but they actually Atheist Viewpoint is no more. From American Atheists, they're more going for 5 and 10 minute bites, which considering it's a national organization and
it's a pretty good thing to do. In addition to being road signs they're putting out,
right,
are very provocative.
They're very, very provocative road signs.
That's correct, but also legal too. Yet you have a number of people in states that are trying to prevent those things from happening, and of course there's one particular individual, which we will not mention his name, in New York City with the Catholic organizations that riles up and gets very upset. They're well known for that. Yeah. So the point is that you're getting out there, you're meeting a number of people. Do you have anything that you might want to say to individuals who are stepping out of the so-called proverbial closet and taking that initial road as to what to expect? What would you say to them to get them going easily? I
would say this, that as I said earlier, I think one of the most important things we do, of course, is to push for the separation of church and state. The other, of at least equal importance, is the fact that there are organizations such as American Atheists and American Humanist Association, New York City Atheists, that if you are on the fence or you're thinking about coming out or whatever, you're not alone. I was here watching the show that you taped previously, and of course, since the internet has exploded, that has been a boon for atheists.
Absolutely.
I mean, it has been for believers too, but
the debates
are awesome. So if you're if you are an atheist, I don't care where you are, if you're watching this on the internet, you are not alone. There are people who you can communicate with,
who will guide you and help you.
And there are atheist organizations in practically everywhere. I mean, they're not very big or anything, but if you Google, you can find them.
Because I have to say, let me just put a button on and say this, that one of the things that I learned from having done the tabling for years is that almost every time, I did it at least, there would be somebody coming up who would say that they were an atheist, and they'd say, I didn't know there was a group like you. I mean, you guys have been with me. We've all tabled together at one time.
That's right.
And just so often that people we didn't know there was anyone like you. So that's probably, I guess, this show and the other shows that are being done, both on cable and on the internet, is very important that you realize that if you are an atheist or you're thinking about being an atheist,
or even if you're agnostic, that's quite all right.
And you know what? Even if you're a believer with a question that you can't answer where you are, we'll be happy to answer questions and without confrontation.
Right, and we're just as moral as any other organization might be, religious or not.
Right. Well, I personally won't say that because I don't think it needs to be said. There's atheists accused of being aloof and arrogant, and that just happens to be me. But most atheists are very nice people. So
I have a question.
Okay.
You were a plaintiff in some of the cases we're involved with.
I was
Which ones were they?
I was a plaintiff in the 9/11 cross, the 9/11 memorial. I guess we started out with 4 or 5 people, and then it whittled down to
3.
to Jane Everhart, and Ken Bronstein, and myself.
Right.
And that was a very interesting experience. And I remember when we were doing what is it called? They were doing the hearing, I guess, the initial hearing, and demonstrating outside the courthouse, and it was freezing cold. So froze my tuchus off. So that's a expression that's used by Robert Ingersoll, of course.
Yes,
as you
of
know.
course. Well, I think this is important because sometimes the organizations, when you get out there and protest, or at least demonstrate as to why you are sticking to the principles that there should be a separation of church and state, these are some of the examples of what happens if you do not voice your opinion or at least try things in court. Things become settled in their way, and it's accepted as being traditional after a while, and before you know it, you don't have any basis on which to stand on.
And
that's why it's very important for those people who, when you see us out there, we are doing this because this is part of the constitutional right. You have a right to not only worship, not to worship, to be indifferent, but you have that right to do that. And not to see things cascade in one way or another, develop into this is tradition now, this is the way we've always done that, and let it stay that way, and you're diminishing your role and diminishing your right to have the separation, at least as far as the Constitution is concerned.
Because separation of church and state is really not an atheist issue. It's everybody's issue.
That's right.
And I think that there are a lot of Christians and maybe even some Jews who support a theocracy. Think of it in warm and fuzzy terms. But if this were ever to become a Christian theocracy, I think that all of these Christian groups now who are just lovey-dovey and cooperating, the gloves will come off.
Yes, which is the genuine form of Christianity, Baptist or evangelicals, Catholic, Lutheran, Protestant.
I don't want there to be a political atheist nation either for that same reason, because there will be that litmus test. You know it's coming, and I didn't need the government to tell me there was no God any more than I needed to tell me that there is a God. And I think everybody who has a vested interest in belief, I may disagree with you, but I think the best way to protect it is to protect everybody's right to have a conscience, freedom of conscience.
And on that final note,
on that note,
thank you very much for participating and sending the community out there as to different points of view.
So get in touch with us if you if you need us. And I thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much.
This was fun.
Okay.